A startling declaration broke through the quiet dignity that had defined Robert Duvall for more than 6 decades. At the age of 94, a man revered for his discipline, restraint, and almost monastic respect for the craft chose to break a silence that many believed he would carry to his final days. The revelation struck Hollywood with a force that felt almost historical. After a lifetime of calm professionalism, he confessed that there were 4 actors he could not stand, not even for a single minute, across his entire career. For an industry that had always regarded Duvall as the embodiment of grace under pressure, the statement was nothing short of seismic. For years, journalists, collaborators, and fans alike had admired Duvall for something far deeper than his awards. They admired him for the absence of theatrical chaos in his life. While others were consumed by feuds, vanity, or carefully staged public personas, he moved like a man untouched by scandal. He was the quiet giant, the figure who elevated every scene, every ensemble, every story without ever demanding the spotlight for himself. Yet beneath that self-control lay memories he had tried to bury, moments that had festered in silence, and wounds that had never fully healed. It was only now, with age stripping away the last concerns about reputation, that he felt compelled to speak. Insiders revealed that the breaking point came not from bitterness, but from reflection. In recent years, Duvall had watched documentaries and tributes that shape-shifted the past, turning tension into friendship and rivalry into collaboration. The more he listened to these polished narratives, the more he felt the truth slipping away, replaced by a comforting illusion that never reflected the complexity of what actually happened behind the camera. That slow erosion of reality weighed on him until one particular evening pushed him past the edge. He attended a tribute celebrating his lifetime of work, a ceremony filled with standing ovations, glowing speeches, and archival footage of his most iconic scenes. The crowd cheered with warmth, wrapped in nostalgia and admiration. Yet as he sat in the audience, he felt an unexpected heaviness settle over him. The narrator spoke of lifelong respect among colleagues, of creative partnerships built on trust and affection. But on the screen, Duvall saw the faces of men who had made some of the most difficult moments of his professional life. He listened to a rewritten history that erased sabotage, jealousy, manipulation, and cruelty, replacing the truth with a comforting fiction. He later admitted that he felt something inside him snap. With an Oscar on his shelf, decades of acclaim behind him, and a sense that there was nothing left to protect, he decided to reclaim the truth, not for vengeance, but for clarity. Young actors, he believed, deserved to know what really shaped the performances they studied and the films they admired. The industry deserved a record that was honest, not airbrushed. And so, with the weight of a lifetime pressing behind each word, he finally said what he had never dared to say before. His voice did not tremble. His honesty did not waver. He named 4 men, and the first name he decided to reveal was Dustin Hoffman. The truth did not begin with fury, it began with memory. To understand why Robert Duvall chose to speak after 6 long decades, one must step backward into the cramped, dusty apartments of New York City in the early 1960s, where 2 young actors struggled side by side. At that time, Duvall and Dustin Hoffman were not legends, not icons, not names whispered with reverence in acting schools. They were simply 2 men clinging to the same fragile dream. They rehearsed lines in flickering lamplight, shared cheap meals, and imagined the careers that felt so distant they might as well have belonged to another world. Those early nights had a purity to them, or so Duvall believed. There was the shared hunger to perform well, to be taken seriously, to break into an industry that devoured more souls than it rewarded. Whatever else the future might bring, he had felt that sincerity was the foundation beneath their friendship. This belief would later fracture in ways he never expected. Duvall recalled practicing for auditions with an almost monastic devotion, shaping interpretations that he believed revealed the secret architecture of a character. He would pace the apartment, testing rhythms, refining emotional threads, building performances from silence upward. What he did not realize at first was that he was not rehearsing alone. Hoffman observed him, not with admiration, but with intention. When Hoffman appeared at his own auditions, he began to use Duvall's interpretations, sometimes word for word, sometimes gesture for gesture, sometimes with the smallest alterations that barely concealed the origin. To the outside world, this might have seemed harmless, even collaborative. But to Duvall, who valued integrity with the precision of a craftsman, the realization felt like a deeper kind of theft. Hoffman did not simply borrow an idea, he borrowed the hours, the discipline, the emotional architecture that Duvall had built from the ground up. What shook Duvall was not only that Hoffman used these ideas, but that he later dismissed their origin under the gentle, flattering language of influence. He used the word inspiration. Duvall used the word theft. Both men understood what those words truly meant, and neither backed away from their meaning. Their relationship grew strained, though Duvall never allowed the bitterness to surface publicly. He believed that professionalism demanded a controlled distance, not retaliation. Still, the pattern persisted. Hoffman continued to call him for advice, sometimes under the pretense of camaraderie, sometimes under the guise of artistic consultation. Duvall, generous by temperament and committed to the craft, offered guidance, believing his insight would help Hoffman find his own path. One of the clearest examples came during the preparation for the role of Ratso Rizzo in Midnight Cowboy. Hoffman called him repeatedly, uncertain about the character's vocal identity, unsure of the mannerisms that would anchor the performance. Duvall spent hours shaping possibilities, suggesting tonal pivots, and helping sculpt the roughness that would eventually define the role. But when Hoffman later spoke in interviews, he attributed the discovery of the voice entirely to his own observations of New York street life. Not a single mention of their conversations appeared. For Duvall, it was not the erasure itself that stung. It was the realization that the trust he extended had not been met with honesty. If the story had ended there, perhaps the two men might have drifted apart quietly, without the weight of betrayal. But something far more consequential occurred. In 1971, both Duvall and Hoffman were considered for the lead role in The French Connection. For Duvall, this opportunity represented a threshold, a chance to expand his range and step into a role that could redefine the trajectory of his career. As he pursued the part, he discovered that Hoffman had allegedly told the director, William Friedkin, that Duvall was difficult, uncooperative, and unreliable. These claims were framed as anecdotes from the theater world, delivered with the ease of someone who knew how to disguise sabotage as concerned observation. When Friedkin himself later told Duvall what had been said, the truth hardened into a permanent fracture. The accusation was not simply false, it was a direct attempt to eliminate a rival from consideration. And if the reports were accurate, it worked. The role went to Gene Hackman, who performed magnificently, yet the shadow of what might have been remained. Duvall understood then that Hoffman's ambition operated without boundary, and that the generosity he had extended had been weaponized against him. From that moment forward, he decided he would no longer answer Hoffman's calls. The rift might have faded into obscurity, but Hollywood does not forget its secrets. Duvall carried the weight of that betrayal through every subsequent encounter. They crossed paths at events, smiled for cameras, praised each other's work. The public saw camaraderie. The truth was something else entirely. Beneath the polite choreography lay a quiet hostility that simmered for decades, preserved through silence because Duvall believed the work mattered more than the feud. What made this story important to him now, at the age of 94, was not revenge. It was clarity. He wanted young actors to understand that even in the golden age of cinema, artistry could be shadowed by jealousy, ego, and deception. He wanted to dismantle the illusion that great performances were always born of great friendships. And above all, he wanted to reclaim the truth before the world rewrote it completely. Duvall's revelation about Hoffman was only the first stone to fall. What came next would reach far deeper into the mythology of Hollywood, touching the legacy of a man whose brilliance was matched only by the magnitude of his ego. Because the next name Duvall spoke belonged to Marlon Brando. The moment Robert Duvall spoke the name Marlon Brando, the atmosphere around his interview changed. A quiet tension settled over the room, the kind that precedes a revelation, powerful enough to alter the way an entire industry remembers itself. Brando was not simply an actor, he was a myth, a force of nature, a figure whose presence still towered over classrooms, film sets, and conversations about artistic genius. To speak of him honestly, without reverence, required a rare courage. Duvall possessed that courage, and once he chose to use it, the shockwaves spread instantly through Hollywood and beyond. News outlets seized upon the revelation with a fervor that bordered on frenzy. Headlines exploded across entertainment platforms declaring that a 94-year-old legend had just dismantled one of Hollywood's most untouchable icons. Commentators aired immediate reactions, some astonished, some indignant, and some quietly acknowledging that the industry had long maintained a delicate silence around Brando's behavior. As they replayed Duvall's words, analysts dissected every syllable, searching for hidden meanings, motivations, or implications for the historical record. Two distinct currents emerged in the public response. The first came from those who believed Duvall had done something essential and long overdue. They argued that artistic brilliance should never erase the impact of destructive behavior. They praised Duvall for refusing to protect a narrative that had dominated film culture for generations, and they lauded his honesty as a necessary correction to a history shaped more by myth-making than truth. The second current was more skeptical. Some questioned why Duvall had waited so long to speak. Others wondered whether age, reflection, or disillusionment had shifted his perspective. They argued that such disclosures threatened to tarnish the legacy of artists who could no longer defend themselves. A few even suggested that Hollywood's golden age should remain untouched, preserved as a fantasy rather than examined for its harsher realities. These responses revealed a deeper divide within the industry, the tension between protecting icons and confronting the complexities of real human behavior behind famous performances. As debates unfolded, something remarkable occurred. Crew members, assistants, and technicians who had worked on productions with Brando began to step forward quietly, offering fragments of stories they had once shared only in private. They spoke of sets thrown into chaos, of last-minute changes that derailed schedules, of performances unpredictable enough to make editing an act of near impossible labor. They spoke with respect for Brando's talent, but also with relief that someone of Duvall's stature had finally admitted what many had witnessed yet never dared to articulate publicly. One former sound technician recalled the exact kind of behavior that Duvall described, recounting how Brando would deliberately shift vocal deliveries from take to take, altering rhythm, volume, or tone with the apparent intention of asserting control. Another crew member from the chase confirmed that subtle noises had indeed disrupted several of Duvall's takes. These testimonies were not accusations. They were acknowledgments that aligned closely with Duvall's account, adding weight to his decision to speak. The industry found itself confronting a difficult truth: brilliance and destructive ego had coexisted more often than it wished to admit. Duvall himself had emphasized that Brando's genius was undeniable, but he refused to accept the idea that genius alone should excuse harm. According to his statement, great performances did not always arise from harmony. They often survived in spite of the tumult behind the camera. While the revelations about Brando ignited a cultural debate, the discussion expanded even further when Duvall addressed the behavior of James Caan. Many believed that the chemistry between Tom Hagen and Sonny Corleone in The Godfather was a testament to a powerful working partnership. Yet Duvall revealed that the intensity audiences admired had grown from real tension, not brotherly affection. When he described the competitive actions that had shaped their scenes together, the admission astonished both fans and insiders. Again, the industry scrambled for answers, and once more, quiet voices emerged from the shadows. A former assistant director from The Godfather confirmed that the energy between Caan and Duvall had not always been friendly. He described moments during rehearsal in which the atmosphere felt electrically charged, the kind of tension that could either ignite a great performance or fracture a cast entirely. It was a reminder that art and personal conflict often intertwined in ways invisible to the public. But nothing stirred the media more fiercely than the mention of Robert Redford. Known for his elegance, intelligence, and activism, Redford had cultivated an image that felt almost untouchable. When Duvall described their strained dynamic on the set of The Natural and the dismissive statement attributed to Redford, Hollywood felt a collective jolt. The contrast between the public persona and the private behavior was too stark to ignore. Analysts revisited Redford's body of work, his leadership at Sundance, his influence as both actor and director, examining the gap between perception and reality. Crew members from The Natural spoke to reporters, some anonymously, recalling extended waits, unexpected delays, and an environment shaped by Redford's demands. These accounts did not attack his artistry. Instead, they revealed a more complex portrait of a man who wielded power deliberately in ways that affected everyone around him. They also lent potential credibility to Duvall's assertion that his role had been intentionally diminished, a claim that many had once dismissed as rumor. Publicists for both Hoffman and Redford released carefully crafted statements expressing surprise at Duvall's comments, praising his legacy, and offering diplomatic gestures of respect. The formality of these responses inspired speculation. Some wondered whether the politeness masked discomfort. Others interpreted the statements as an attempt to contain the expanding narrative, preventing further scrutiny of long-buried tensions. Amid all of this, Duvall himself remained calm. His intentions had already been stated with clarity. He did not seek to damage careers, reputations, or legacies. Instead, he aimed to correct a version of history that had grown too comfortable, too polished, too distant from the truth. His perspective was not that of a man settling old scores, but that of an elder craftsman protecting the integrity of an art form he had dedicated his life to. What emerged from this media avalanche was not chaos, but revelation. Patterns that had once been whispered became visible. Stories once considered rumors were now treated as part of the historical fabric of Hollywood. And through it all, Duvall stood firm, declining to embellish, refusing to retract, insisting only on honesty. The storm was far from over. The revelations were building toward a moment that would redefine how audiences understood not only Duvall's journey, but the very nature of the films they believed they knew so well. The truth was drawing closer to its sharpest point, and the heart of the story had not yet been revealed. Because the deepest rupture, the moment that had transformed reflection into action, was still to come. The moment of rupture arrived quietly, not with anger, but with a subtle shift inside Robert Duvall that only he could feel. It happened during a tribute held in his honor, a celebration designed to immortalize his achievements, to wrap his legacy in warmth, gratitude, and polished nostalgia. The auditorium glowed with soft lights. His peers, younger actors, and veteran directors filled the seats, offering applause that rose and fell like a reverent tide. It should have been a comforting evening. Instead, it became the turning point that changed everything. He sat in the front row as the large screen above the stage flickered to life. Scenes from his earliest films appeared, accompanied by a narrator describing the camaraderie, trust, and creative harmony that had supposedly shaped those productions. The audience responded with admiration, laughing at familiar moments, applauding at iconic lines, and expressing the affection reserved for a beloved artist whose work had touched generations. But as Duvall watched, a heaviness pressed steadily against his chest. He recognized the faces of the colleagues who appeared beside him on screen. He remembered every exchange, every rehearsal, every moment of tension that had been smoothed into cinematic perfection. He heard the narrator speak about unity, mutual respect, and lasting friendships, painting a portrait of his career that felt beautiful but false. The applause around him grew louder, yet he felt increasingly disconnected from the story being told. The truth of those relationships had been swallowed by Hollywood's unyielding instinct to beautify its past. The tribute reached a moment that struck him with particular force. It showed a scene from a film in which he had endured deliberate sabotage, where every take had been derailed by faint sounds just off camera. The audience applauded the performance, praising its emotional control. The narrator described the wonderful partnership between the actors. Duvall sat still, the memory of those ruined takes rising sharply in his mind. It was in that instant that he understood how deeply the industry had rewritten the past. He had lived the tension, the manipulation, the struggle to preserve his own performance in the face of ego and power, yet the narrative presented to the world erased those conflicts completely, coating them with sentimentality. By the time the tribute ended, something within him had crystallized. He no longer felt the need to protect the illusions that had defined Hollywood's memory. At 94, with a lifetime of experience behind him, he believed that honesty was the only remaining service he could offer to the craft he loved. The industry did not need another layer of myth. It needed truth, difficult as that truth might be. When he finally spoke publicly about the four actors who had shaped some of his most challenging professional moments, he did so without malice. His voice carried the calm weight of someone who had reflected deeply before choosing his words. The first name he addressed had been Dustin Hoffman, whose early companionship had gradually dissolved into a pattern of imitation, erasure, and ultimately sabotage. Duvall did not speak to diminish Hoffman's artistry. He spoke to reclaim the truth of what had unfolded between them. But the second name struck with far greater force because it belonged to a legend often shielded by reverence. When he said Marlon Brando, the room fell into a stunned silence. Duvall spoke openly about Brando's brilliance, acknowledging the undeniable power of his performances. Yet he also described the destructive ego that had overshadowed their work together, the unpredictable shifts, the disruptions, and the deliberate interference that had made entire shooting days collapse. He stated with precision that genius does not excuse cruelty, and that the cost of brilliance is not justified when it harms others in its path. His honesty grew even more pointed when he spoke of James Caan. Audiences had long believed that their chemistry in The Godfather was the product of natural rapport, but Duvall revealed the rivalry beneath the surface, the attempts to seize attention through small, calculated actions, and the simmering conflict that shaped their scenes. What viewers celebrated as authenticity had been forged in the tension between two men with competing instincts and opposing temperaments. Then he reached the fourth name, the revelation that transformed murmurs into open shock. Robert Redford, the industry's golden figure, the embodiment of integrity and refined artistry. Duvall described a version of Redford that contradicted decades of polished public perception. He spoke of manipulation, control, and an attitude that treated colleagues as obstacles rather than collaborators. He recalled a moment during the filming of The Natural when Redford dismissed him with a single remark, a remark that exposed the hierarchy Redford believed defined their profession. It was a hierarchy that placed movie stars above character actors, power above equality. When he repeated the line, "You are a character actor, Bob. I am a movie star. We are not playing by the same rules," the statement settled into the air like a revelation no one could ignore. It illuminated not merely a personal conflict, but a systemic truth about Hollywood's value structure, one where image often overshadowed substance, and where the narratives created for public consumption diverged sharply from the realities experienced by those who lived them. Duvall did not speak with resentment. His tone held a steadiness that suggested liberation rather than retaliation. By releasing these truths, he felt lighter, unburdened by decades of silence. He had protected the image of Hollywood long enough. Now he sought to honor the craft more than the illusion. People, he believed, deserved to know that even the most revered films had been shaped by human flaws, not just cinematic brilliance. What emerged from his revelations was a portrait not of bitterness, but of clarity. He wished to preserve the authenticity of his legacy, to ensure that the younger generation of actors would not mistake myth for reality. Great films, he reminded them, were often forged in tension, ambition, jealousy, and resilience. The truth, not the polished narrative, held the real lessons. And as he reached the end of his account, he paused, offering a final statement that was quiet yet heavy with implication. It was a sentence that unsettled the industry and hinted that the story was far from complete. Those four stood out, but they were not alone. In the days that followed Robert Duvall's revelations, Hollywood moved with an uneasy stillness, as if the industry itself was reconsidering the stories it had long chosen to believe. What began as a single interview had expanded into a broader reckoning, forcing actors, directors, journalists, and audiences to confront the truth that brilliance is often accompanied by shadows. Voices from across generations entered the conversation, some defending long-held myths, others acknowledging that the time for honesty had finally arrived. News programs replayed Duvall's statements with almost ritual reverence, examining the implications for the films that had shaped the cultural imagination. Commentators spoke with measured tones, noting that his stories did not diminish the artistic achievements of the past. Instead, they added dimensions that had been hidden for decades, dimensions that revealed the human cost of masterpieces shaped under pressure, ego, rivalry, and unspoken tension. For some, the revelations were unsettling. For others, they were liberating. They illuminated the complexity behind the golden sheen of Hollywood's most cherished creations. Through it all, Duvall remained steady, offering neither apology nor escalation. He insisted that his intention had never been to provoke outrage or to tarnish anyone's legacy. His purpose was clarity. After 60 years devoted to the craft, he believed that the truth deserved a place beside the accolades, that honesty was itself an act of respect toward cinema. He understood that the industry had always relied on illusions, yet he also believed that sustaining those illusions at the expense of reality did a disservice to the generations who would follow. His reflections became a quiet lesson for young performers seeking to navigate a world built on admiration and ambition. He wanted them to recognize that the pursuit of greatness often coexists with struggle, that talent does not protect one from envy, manipulation, or conflict. He wanted them to understand that artistry requires more than skill. It demands integrity, resilience, and the ability to navigate difficult personalities without losing oneself. He hoped that by revealing the truth, he had offered them a clearer path forward, one illuminated by experience rather than myth. As Hollywood absorbed the impact of his words, conversation shifted from shock to contemplation. People revisited the films shaped by those relationships, viewing them with a fuller understanding of the forces that molded their performances. The recognition did not diminish the art. Instead, it revealed the depth of what actors endure for the sake of a story, the hidden battles that shape the worlds audiences admire on screen. In the quiet that followed, Duvall's legacy appeared not weakened, but strengthened. His honesty offered a rare kind of courage, one that did not seek attention but understanding. By choosing truth over preservation, he honored both the craft and the audience, giving them a final gift, a chance to see the past as it truly was. And yet, even as the industry settled into this new awareness, one question lingered in the air, unresolved and quietly unsettling. His final words had opened a door that no tribute or documentary could close. Those four stood out, but they were not alone.